In your Katrina example, you left out one very important element that I happen to represent, and that's U.S. business. U.S. business should be part of these solutions. It should be part of the plan. Clearly, Walmart, Home Depot, some of the oil companies demonstrated that they did know how to prepare and they did know how to go into action. And we should engage them in our philanthropy, not only in this country, but around the world. Thank you, Jane. Good evening. 7 years ago, there was no Global Philanthropy Forum. It was just an idea of our daughter, Kate. Its goal was to increase international private giving, which hovers a little over 1%, through greater donor awareness. And this forum is the vehicle to accomplish that. But great ideas require great execution. And to fulfill their potential, and that was done through many folks, but particularly through Jane Wales and the World Affairs Council. Through their efforts, we have seen this idea come alive. So why bring the forum to Washington? After such successful conferences in delightful, palm-studded Stanford University. As a founding funder, we have taken a part in GPF almost every year. 2 years ago, as I looked out on the remarkable set of philanthropists gathered for the forum, I got to thinking, why not take GPF to Washington? As it turned out, there was a microphone in front of me at the very moment. It seemed like a good idea then, even better today. Great execution, again, by Jane and her team have made this possible. It probably didn't hurt that she has a few friends in this town. I would only caution that we shouldn't come too often. There are 3 reasons that I thought GPF should come to Washington. The first was that philanthropists want to match the scale of their solution to the scale of the problem. And often we address very large problems. That takes leverage. And the very best opportunities for leverage often are with government agencies. Tomorrow you will hear from Alan Deathridge of Shell Oil and Dan Rudy of USAID about the ways in which they have partnered in advancing transparency overseas. You will visit the World Bank Group's International Finance Corporation and learn about the partnership opportunities that exist there. Governments, like philanthropists, are committed to advancing social goals. Why not leverage each other's expertise by doing it together? The second reason I thought that GPF should go to Washington was that it wouldn't hurt for Washington policymakers to hear what we were thinking about, what was on our minds. Today has been a pretty good beginning. We are committed to advancing systemic change. We want to give back. We want results. The fundamental response of our forum is to help translate our commitment into effective action. Of the 600 donors who are part of the forum, 48% are new to international giving. 77% now devote more than a quarter of their portfolio to international giving. Almost 80% have increased their giving in the past 5 years, half of whom report that they have done so as a direct result of introductions made at the forum to issues, actors, and strategies for giving internationally. While 92% reported that last year's conference influenced their grant making, 77% report that they treat one another as an ongoing information trust as they form their strategies for giving and social investing. We are a community, and we welcome all comers. And there is a third reason. I thought this community should come to Washington, and that is that there is a policy context to all that we do. No matter what our goal, no matter what our passion, we will not achieve it absent good policies in both the private and governmental worlds. Tonight we are hearing from a man who understands the relationship of policy, philanthropy, and activism. He has been a leader in all three worlds. Senator Sam Nunn will be joined on stage by Deana Arsenian, a long-time grant maker whose task it has been to inform policy and broaden the policy options available to governments. I hope you will join me in welcoming Deana, who will in turn introduce former Senator Sam Nunn, one of my mother's favorite senators, even though she only met him on C-SPAN. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, John, and thanks for pronouncing my name correctly. Jane Wells asked me to moderate the panel on advancing peace and security, reducing nuclear danger, and to introduce former Senator Sam Nunn as the main speaker. So I did what any moderator would do. I Googled Senator Nunn. And Google revealed over 400,000 entries for Sam Nunn, described by some as a conservative Democratic senator from Georgia. Then on February 21st, I was reading the New York Times, and I saw 2 entries for Sam Nunn on the op-ed pages of the New York Times. One of the op-ed pages, an article by Nicholas Kristof, suggested that President Bush should appoint Senator Nunn to the position of Secretary of Defense. So the obvious question is, what other individual gets over 400,000 entries on Google and appears twice on the same page of the New York Times? It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce this panel, and particularly so because of the long-standing relationship between Senator Nunn and Carnegie Corporation of New York, of which the senator is a former trustee. As one of America's first philanthropists, Andrew Carnegie would have been pleased to see a room of like-minded individuals. Like you, he devoted much of his life to make the world a safer and better place. Capturing the essence of philanthropy, Andrew Carnegie once wrote, "The man who dies thus rich dies disgraced." But Andrew Carnegie was also very aware of the importance of using wealth wisely. A prolific writer, he also wrote, "The miser millionaire who hoards his wealth does less injury to society than a careless one who squanders his unwisely, even if he does so under the mantle of sacred charity." Nuclear Threat Initiative, NTI, founded in 2001 by Ted Turner and Sam Nunn, is one of those institutions that uses its wealth wisely. NTI aims to strengthen global security by reducing the risk of use and preventing the spread of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Even in a world crowded with international dangers, nuclear weapons pose a particular challenge. As we meet here today, we have 8 nuclear powers: United States, United Kingdom, Russia, China, France, India, Pakistan, and presumably Israel. But the nuclear club is growing. The Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, has vowed to pursue a uranium enrichment program that could lead to Iran becoming a nuclear state, while North Korea has declared that it has become a nuclear state. The overall number of deployed strategic nuclear weapons in the arsenals of the United States and Russia stands over 8,000, with most of these weapons on trigger alert despite the end of the Cold War. And experts question the effectiveness and the sustainability of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So to help us think through how to reduce the nuclear danger, let us all welcome the man who needs really no introduction, Senator Sam Nunn.
Thank you very much, Deana. Hope you will forgive my voice tonight. I'm a combination of allergies and a cold, I suppose, but I'll sputter through it, and I hope you will be patient with me if I have a little bit of difficulty. Deana, thank you so much for the gracious introduction and also for the support Carnegie has given to the overall nuclear equation for many years, particularly during the breakup of the Soviet Union. Without Carnegie's Foundation's support of Dr. Ash Carter and the work he did at Harvard, Senator Richard Lugar and I would have had an extremely difficult time. It was difficult anyway, but without it, it would have been pretty much impossible in passing the Nunn-Lugar program in 1991 when the Soviet Union broke up. And without the Nunn-Lugar program, we might not have an NTI tonight. So, Deana, thank you, and thank Dave Hamburg and Vartan Gregorian and others who have meant so much to the quest that we all have such a stake in. Secretary of State Dean Acheson was once asked how he would define foreign policy. He pondered for a moment and then he replied, "Foreign policy is one damn thing after another." When I look around this room tonight and I consider the numerous diverse worthy causes that are sponsored and supported by this assembled group, I think I would say we're involved in one damn good thing after another in this room. However, all of us in the foundation world have a common denominator, indeed an audacious hope that we as donors and nonprofit organizations can inform policy, leverage our resources to produce beneficial change, and help stimulate our government, our media, and our citizens to focus attention, resources, and determination in addressing the urgent problems of our time. When Ted Turner saw a 60-minute program on the nuclear dangers, he saw an urgent problem. That was in the year 2000. And Ted was appalled that 10 years after the end of the Cold War, the United States and Russia had still thousands of nuclear weapons on hair-trigger alert, ready to destroy much of the world within just a few minutes. Ted asked me that year whether a well-funded private foundation could focus on these dangers and make a difference. Tim Worth, an old friend of mine in the Senate, had already demonstrated in the UN Foundation that the combination of Ted Turner and experts in the field was a very powerful combination. But we weren't certain about the nuclear quest. We spent 6 months seeking the advice of experts in the nuclear arena, the biological arena, and the philanthropic arena. We even thought about the combined Turner-Nunn personality mix and whether that really was sustainable. On that front, we concluded that Ted and I combined, on average, had about the right amount of charisma and money to co-chair this effort. The outcome was NTI, the Nuclear Threat Initiative, with a major component called the Global Health and Security Initiative. People haven't heard nearly as much about the work we're doing in the biological area, but Mark Smolinski and Peggy Hamburg and their team have done, I think, a magnificent job and are continuing to. And I'll mention some of their work in my remarks tonight. Our goal to strengthen security by reducing the risk of use and preventing the spread of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. We set out to contribute by word, thought, and deed to account for and secure nuclear weapons materials around the globe, to reduce the threat from biological weapons by strengthening the world's capacity to prevent, detect, respond to, and contain biological threats, whether intentional or by act of nature, and to facilitate the establishment of normative standards of conduct and ethics to help deter and prevent biological terrorism. 3, to bring about the necessary reductions, safeguards, and operational changes to the United States and Russian nuclear forces so that they are no longer in a Cold War doomsday posture, with both sides having little time for warning and little time for thinking before launching. For many organizations, as we've heard already tonight, it is essential to be involved in policy. For NTI, it is absolutely imperative. In the nuclear arena, the heavy lifting has to be done by governments, which have the large-scale resources and the authority to take on the threats and to reduce them. But we have also learned that direct action by a nonprofit organization like NTI in the right circumstances could be and can be an important catalyst and example for governments, not only our government, but governments abroad. We also knew that to have a real impact, an organization would have to have some essential ingredients. First, top experts who were widely known and respected for their experience and knowledge. Second, a strong communications team to raise awareness of the catastrophic threat without creating despair, and that is a big without, and to explain in understandable terms what has to be done to close the very large gaps between the threat and the response. The financial resources not only to tell the world what must be done in this arena, but also to demonstrate through direct action projects how to do it. And governance by an international board of directors with experience and expertise in government and with the stature necessary to gain the attention of top governmental policymakers. Trying to explain NTI in a few words would be like trying to explain Ted Turner in a few words, a task that is obviously impossible. You'll hear from him tomorrow. So I won't attempt the latter mission, but let me give you a few examples of the former one. One of the founding goals of NTI was to clean out poorly secured nuclear material still left in hundreds of sites in dozens of countries around the world. We called that mission at the very beginning the Global Cleanout. In the summer of 2002, just 9 months after 9/11, 100 pounds of highly enriched uranium, enough to build 2 to 3 nuclear bombs, sat in an old nuclear research reactor outside Belgrade. We had found out about it when we were bombing Belgrade, and the Russians, in spite of their anger, called us and warned us about that particular stockpile. I'm not sure whether that was before or after we had hit the Chinese embassy by mistake, but nevertheless, the warning was appreciated. This raw material of nuclear terrorism was not secured by any metal detectors or any radiation detectors, just a few armed guards. In other words, below the security standards of a number of American shopping malls. The United States, knowing the risk, started discussions with the Yugoslav government to move the material to Russia so it could be blended down into material that would be unusable in weapons. Russia was agreeable in the transport and blend down of the materials, but Yugoslavia was reluctant to give up the materials, so it demanded help in defraying the cost of transferring the material and clearing up the leftover nuclear waste so the site could be used by the people in that area for gainful economic matters. The U.S. negotiators had no authority to pay for that, and the talks stalled. The State Department called our team at the Nuclear Threat Initiative asking for help. We were able to commit $5 million for cleanup within 24 hours of this State Department request, and the message was able to be delivered immediately by the State Department to Yugoslavia to complete the deal. On August 22, 2002, the nuclear material was loaded into canisters placed in trucks driven to the Belgrade airport under the escort of 1,200 armed guards and flown to Russia with a fighter escort, where it was rendered safe and put beyond the reach of terrorists for good. The following morning, the Washington Post ran an article on page 1 describing the events of what became known as Project Venture. Beyond addressing the immediate danger, the story had the effect we had hoped for. It highlighted the danger of nuclear material in poorly secured reactors around the world. It led Congress to ask why the government needed to rely on the funds of a private organization to secure nuclear material. It drew a U.S. commitment to clean out 24 high-threat sites, a work that I have to report is still in progress, not completed. It eventually, albeit 3 years later, led the United States Department of Energy to launch a $450 million global threat reduction initiative with Russian cooperation, which set milestones for cleaning out poorly secured bomb-usable material from nuclear reactors around the world. Since then, the United States and Russia and the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Association, have undertaken nuclear material cleanout operations in Bulgaria, Romania, Uzbekistan, and the Czech Republic. NTI has also been working in the last 3 years directly with the government of Kazakhstan to eliminate more than 24 bombs worth of highly enriched uranium, work that was completed earlier this year, which led the president of Kazakhstan to commit to the elimination of all bomb-making material that is still in that country. I tell this story not because the mission of getting weapons usable nuclear material around the globe, getting that material secured, has been accomplished. It has not. There's a long way to go. But that effort is underway, something we could not have reported a few years ago. I also do not contend that NTI alone could have made this happen. Governments had to act for this initiative to be completed, but I do believe that we made a very significant difference. Another urgent goal for our organization, described in the text of our 6-month scoping study, was to, quoting from that study, to provoke a fundamental review of the role and purpose of nuclear weapons in the aftermath of the Cold War, including specifically an examination of the operational force posture of the U.S. and Russian forces, end quote. On the morning of January 25th, 1995, and most people still don't know this, although it's public information, a rocket was launched from an island off the northwest coast of Norway. The launch was part of a research project investigating the Northern Lights, and it had been announced to each of Norway's neighbors in a standard letter sent months earlier. But for some reason, Russia's letter had been misplaced, and now the Russian radar operators thought they were under attack. Under their procedures, Russia had 8 minutes to decide whether to launch a massive nuclear strike against missile silos in Europe and the United States. The warning made its way almost instantly to Boris Yeltsin, who for the first time ever activated his nuclear briefcase, the prerequisite for ordering a missile attack. And he and his senior advisors monitored the rocket's flight, Russian strategic forces were put on high alert. Ultimately, the disaster was averted. Russian radar operators identified the rocket, and later it landed harmlessly in the ocean. But experts around the world were shocked. CIA official Peter Pry, for instance, called it the single most dangerous moment of the nuclear age. Now, this was in 1995, not 1965. Most disturbing of all, it occurred during a time of peace when the relations between our two countries were certainly warmer certainly than today. If Russia had not had its nuclear missiles on hair trigger, capable of launching within minutes, the danger would have been greatly diminished. The satellite launch would have been seen for what it was long before any nuclear Russian missiles could have been fired. Most of all, there would have been more time to think, time to communicate, and time to be certain. Hair-trigger nuclear posture that we have today was instigated at the height of the Cold War to deter the use of nuclear weapons. Today, with the eroded Russian early warning system, the posture is increasing the risk it was designed to reduce for both the United States and for Russia and for our citizens. The bottom line, 15 years after the end of the Cold War, the United States and Russia still have Cold War nuclear force postures that are together unstable and dangerous and set a very poor example for the world. Working to change government policy is very difficult work. We at NTI have not been able to get both sides to remove their weapons from hair trigger, even though we've written about it, spoken about it, commissioned studies about it, both Russian and U.S. studies, by the way, gotten Americans and Russians talking about it, and even though President Bush, by his own words, would appear to agree with us about it. 24 years in the Senate have taught me that government rarely changes what it is doing without some pressure from the outside, particularly if it has been doing it a long, long time. That's why it's important to raise awareness of these threats and of what we need to do to meet them. So public awareness is also a major goal of our organization. Without media and public awareness, it is close to impossible to get governmental policymakers to focus on a problem, even a potentially catastrophic problem. We at NTI are working on this. To be a force in the debate, the public needs to know the gap between what government is doing and what it ought to be doing. So we're telling Americans what we believe to be the facts, that terrorism with weapons of mass destruction is our greatest threat, that bin Laden has said it's his religious duty to acquire these weapons, that al-Qaeda said they have a right to kill 4 million Americans, 2 million of them children, that bin Laden secured a religious order authorizing a catastrophic attack against the United States, and that bin Laden is not the only group, that other groups are also capable of this type thinking, as we and our friends in Japan found in 1995 from the Aum Shinrikyo chemical attack. We're explaining to people what the 9/11 Commission concluded, quoting them, "A nuclear bomb can be built with a relatively small amount of nuclear material. A trained nuclear engineer with an amount of highly enriched uranium or plutonium about the size of a grapefruit or an orange, together with commercially available material, could fashion a nuclear device that would fit in a van like the one parked in the garage of the World Trade Center in 1993. Such a bomb would level lower Manhattan," end quote. Highly enriched uranium is hard to make, but it is not so hard to steal. We've got to make it a lot harder. It is housed in hundreds of facilities in dozens of countries, some of it secured by nothing more than an underpaid guard and a chain-link fence. The largest amount of unsecured material is in Russia, but bomb-making material is also stored in over 40 different countries around the globe. The most effective, least expensive way to prevent nuclear terrorism is to secure nuclear weapons and nuclear materials at the source. Acquiring weapons and materials is the hardest step for the terrorists to take and the easiest step for us to stop. By contrast, every other step in the process, building the bomb, transporting it, and detonating it, is easy for the terrorists to take and much, much harder for us to stop. Trying to detect a bomb once it's already made is like looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. That is why the defense against catastrophic terrorism must begin with securing weapons and fissile materials in every country and in every facility that has them. No nuclear material, no nuclear weapon. No nuclear weapon, no nuclear terrorism. The bottom line on the nuclear front, we are in a race between cooperation and catastrophe. The same is true in spades in the biological area. On the bio front, NTI is focused on the complex and critical task of reducing bio threats with a focus on increasing security and strengthening global disease surveillance. The World Health Organization is responsible for investigating infectious disease outbreaks around the world. Unfortunately, until a few years ago, WHO, the World Health Organization, had to raise money from member states before dispatching a team of investigators to the site of disease outbreak in poor countries that might not be able to reimburse. In 2002, our organization committed $500,000 to the WHO to create a revolving fund so teams could deploy within 24 hours of a reported infectious disease outbreak. And the cost of deployment could be raised and the funds replenished later. In other words, respond first, raise the money later. Rapid response can mean the difference between a locally contained outbreak and a widespread epidemic, whether a disease is naturally occurring or intentionally caused. Already, this revolving fund has been used by WHO to respond to numerous outbreaks, including avian flu, SARS, Ebola virus, and the yellow fever. The rising threat of global epidemics and bioterrorism has given new urgency to the need for disease surveillance and early detection. NTI is invested in an effort to engage the governments of Jordan, Israel, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority in designing a disease surveillance system that shares early warning information among these four partners about disease outbreaks. And we hope that that organization, which is already a fact in being, will spread to other countries in the Middle East. So that is an operational effort, even in the circumstances that exist in the Middle East today. This positive experience later, just recently, has led us to a new initiative to engage other areas where there is tremendous tension and, in my view, likelihood of people being tempted by as a weapon. India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. We're trying to help in that region, help each country strengthen its disease surveillance capacities and work together on the creation of a regional system. That effort has just started. And we also hope to promote a similar effort in Southeast Asia. A third bio example. One of the principal tools the World Health Organization uses in global disease surveillance is the Global Public Health and Intelligence Network, known as GFIN, a database operated by the Public Health Agency of Canada that tracks local news wires and public health websites for signs of an infectious outbreak. Until recently, however, GFIN only gathered news and published reports in English, excluding thousands of sources and potentially billions of people. In November 2004, NTI partnered with a Canadian company to give GFIN a significant upgrade. The upgraded database, GFIN2, tracks documents and produces reports in the United Nations' 5 other official languages now: Arabic, Chinese, French, Russian, and Spanish. Even before its upgrade, GFIN identified nearly 40% of the 200 outbreaks the WHO observes in a year. It pointed investigators toward the 2001 typhoid fever outbreak in Kenya, for example, and toward the outbreak of cholera in Zanzibar a year later. But when it was clear after 2003 SARS outbreak that it could not monitor the Chinese language newspapers, and that was pretty clear, then that gave rise to our getting involved. This long-needed upgrade is making a difference, but there's a long, long way to go in meeting this global imperative. I'm thrilled to learn that Dr. Larry Brilliant, who's with us this evening, sitting in front, executive director of Google.org, has called for dramatically upgrading the capacities and expanding this type of network, a very, very important mission. The bottom line is that there has been progress around the world in reducing threats from nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. But there is so much that has not been done, and what's undone has catastrophic potential. There are loose nuclear weapons materials in more than 100 sites in 40 countries, with no comprehensive plan or priority time frame for securing it all. The U.S. has funded security upgrades, and they have been completed for 48 of 85 Russian warhead sites where the United States plans to provide assistance. There are believed to be 150 to 200 warhead sites in total in Russia. We're working on about one half of them. Both the United States and Russia still have thousands of nuclear weapons on hair-trigger alert, and I alluded to that earlier, with no evident plans to make any change, and that is one that we are still trying to tackle. We have no transparency or mutual accountability on literally thousands of battlefield nuclear weapons, a terrorist dream. Most battlefield nuclear weapons could take out at least half of a major city. Most nations of the world have little capacity to detect new disease outbreaks, even though an infectious disease outbreak in one nation is a threat to us all. So we have a long, long way to go in what I call, on both the nuclear and the biological front, the race between cooperation and catastrophe. After hundreds of speeches, opinion pieces, articles, and interviews, public awareness is higher, but not high enough. So we at NTI decided to add something to our repertoire of writing and speaking about the threat. In the words of the Wall Street Journal, quote, Mr. Nunn, who isn't known for his left coast sensibilities, decided to go to Hollywood, end quote. Not really, but I did head slightly in that direction. With generous support from the Carnegie Corporation and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, we produced a movie called Last Best Chance, a 45-minute docudrama that tells the fictional story of al-Qaeda operatives who make 3 separate attempts to acquire nuclear weapons and nuclear materials. In one case, they recruit a scientist. In another, they bribe a guard. In a third, they overpower a lightly guarded research reactor. In each case, their efforts are discovered, but too late. Once terrorists possess nuclear material, the theme of the movie makes it clear that we have missed our last best chance. We hope that as people see this film, they ask themselves, if a terrorist nuclear bomb goes off tonight somewhere in the world, what would we wish we had done to stop it? And why aren't we doing it now? Tonight I close with a 2-minute film from our clip, Last Best Chance. I thank each of you for being interested in this subject, for listening this evening, but I thank you most of all for what you're doing for America and for the world. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Mr. President. We have a situation.
Someone is trying to acquire Russian tactical weapons, short-range battlefield
I know what
warheads.
they are.
Sir, Al-Qaeda has computed all the Muslims killed in the past 50 years. They believe they're owed 4 million lives.
We open up the floor to questions and comments. I was asked to ask a few questions just to begin the discussion. Senator Nunn, I want to begin with a broad, overarching question that goes to the heart of the Nuclear Threat Initiative. And the question is this: in the context of globalization, the advancement in communication, and the diffusion of scientific knowledge, how is it possible to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons?
I think your question states the challenge and why it's different than it was back in the 1950s when we had the Atoms for Peace program, and we and the Soviet Union were furnishing highly enriched uranium to our friends and allies around the globe because we did not believe there would be the scientific knowledge for individuals or small groups to be able to manufacture a nuclear weapon. That has changed. The information age, the knowledge proliferation has changed that. So the job now is much more difficult. And yet we have a lot of tools to work with. I haven't given up on the Non-Proliferation Treaty, although it has got some fundamental weaknesses. The United Nations has some fundamental weaknesses, but I certainly haven't, and I know the people, and most of the people in this room have not given up on that. So the NPT can be strengthened. The IAEA can be strengthened. One of the first things we did when we stood up our organization, we made a couple of $1 million grant to the International Atomic Energy Agency that had not had an increase in their budget for 10 years, and others followed and matched that. So all of those instruments can be strengthened. But most of all, we have to have leadership from the top. President Bush and President Putin have a good relationship. That relationship has not got much meat on the bones, in my view. We've made some progress in them announcing goals on the nuclear arena. We've made almost no progress in terms of the weapons on hair trigger alert. It would go a long way in the world if the United States and Russia said, we're the ones that have most of the weapons, we're the ones that have had most of the tests. Why don't we take our weapons off hair trigger alert, give more decision time to both sides? It's in our fundamental security interest for the Russians to have more than 8 to 10 minutes to decide whether to fire everything they've got in America. It's in our security interest for the Russians to have good warning systems, not deteriorated warning systems, which they now have. They have the same mutual interest on the other side. So we have different interests now, but on the nuclear side, we should not have those fundamental distinctions. If I looked at all the categories, the leadership would be right at the top of the list with the United States and Russia. It's very important for the United States and Russia to take the lead in this area along those lines before China becomes like we are, and before India becomes like China, and before Pakistan becomes like India. And that is the chain that we're on now, and it looks like it's getting worse. In dealing with Iran and North Korea, that's another question we can reserve for later. But if I were keeping score now, there are several categories that are essential. Removing weapons from hair trigger alert on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being perfect. We're somewhere between 1 and 2 because mainly of the Moscow Treaty, and we have reduced the number of deployed weapons, or at least we pledged to on both sides. In getting tactical nuclear weapons under some kind of accountability or transparency, these are thousands of these weapons that can be, in many cases, transported in a small vehicle that can take out a lot of a city. We've done virtually nothing on accountability since President Bush and President Gorbachev, first President Bush, decided to, without a verification procedure, but nevertheless decided to move the weapons and consolidate them in Russia after the Soviet Union, with us moving a number out of Europe. In terms of securing nuclear materials in Russia, on a scale, that's the Nunn-Lugar program, and the former Soviet Union, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give us now somewhere around a 5 or 6, so we've made a lot of progress in that regard. In terms of the global partnership, the G8 nations have pledged to match us, to match the Nunn-Lugar funding $1 billion a year for 10 years. So that would double the amount that we have to work on this whole area. But the pledges have not been turned into deeds, and the deeds have not been turned into programs. So I would give us somewhere around a 4 or 5 there. On words and deeds, I would give us a little less of a score. So these are the categories and the way I think about it, but I still believe there's a lot that can be done. And when you back off on the optimistic side and you look at the interest, the strategic interest we have of the major powers, Europe, Japan, the United States, Russia, and China, I would submit that the interest on the nuclear side are more similar now than they have been in the last 100, since nuclear age, the last 50 years. So there is hope here. And one other parable of hope that I think people ought to come away a little hopeful is if you look at the light bulbs up here, 1 out of every 10 of those are being supplied with electricity that comes from nuclear material that in 1991, 92 was in nuclear weapons aimed at the United States. 50% of our nuclear energy comes from highly enriched uranium, which is being blended down under the Nunn-Lugar program from Ukrainian and Russian missiles. And 20% of our nuclear power, 20% of our electricity comes from nuclear power. So 1 out of every 10 light bulbs in this room and throughout America is supplied by weapons material that was formerly aimed at American cities. So that's a parable of hope.
Now that's information you can use. I will open this up to the floor because we're running a little low on time. So right there. Oh, yes, just introduce yourself, please, and use a microphone.
Yes, Adele Simmons. 2 questions. Why do you think the U.S. government has not taken a stronger position particularly on the Russian fissile material? And the second question is, what is your opinion of the recent agreement with India?
On the fissile material question, we are doing a lot. Under the Nunn-Lugar program, we've been working with the Russians for a long time. There are complications, there are impediments like taxes, like access to sites, those kind of things. There are conditions that the Congress has put on the Nunn-Lugar program. Senator Lugar, God bless him, every day is up there struggling to remove or mitigate some of those conditions. So things have been done. The thing that is missing, in my view, is consistent focus by President Bush and President Putin themselves to cut through a lot of this and treat it like the imperative problem that it is. On the Indian question, when it was first announced last summer, I said I wanted to wait before I made my decision about whether I thought it was a good or not, as to whether there was a corresponding strategy the administration had vis-a-vis Pakistan and whether there was a corresponding strategy vis-a-vis China. I haven't seen any kind of strategy except leaked documents that basically say we're basically going to help India with their nuclear program in order to help contain China. I think that is not only foolish but counterproductive. I don't think the Indians want to be used in that way, first of all, and second, I think it probably will increase the Chinese efforts, not only in their own arsenal, but also vis-a-vis supplying Pakistan. So I don't see that overall strategy that I was hoping to see, and I would have to be marked down as skeptical with a lot of questions. If I was in Congress, I'd be looking at conditions, and I'd be asking the administration, why were the Indians able to negotiate us out of the things that we should have been insisting on and in one time were, which is they at least should not be able to increase their nuclear weapon material production. But this agreement lets them not only increase their weapon production, it lets them name any site they want to in the future, a military site, which is not subject to inspection. It exempts 7 or 8 of those sites that are already built. And I'm told by the experts that India now has somewhat of a problem in taking care of the uranium needs, quality uranium for both their civilian program and their weapon program. If we alleviate the civilian side by furnishing nuclear fuel, then they are going to be able, if they choose to increase the nuclear side. Whatever they choose to, I'm afraid the perception in China and Pakistan is that that's the route they're heading. So mark me down as very skeptical. I'm still going to listen and hope I see some of those broader questions addressed, but I haven't so far.
Yes, the gentleman right here.
Charlie McConnell, Carnegie, UK. The British government at the moment, the British government at the moment are considering upgrading their nuclear arsenal. Do you think, would your advice be to them, maybe we should set a precedent and actually stop the proliferation by actually giving up our nuclear arsenal?
Well, I would respectfully suggest that the British are in many ways our closest ally. Certainly Tony Blair has indicated over and over again that he has been a very loyal ally and almost indispensable to President Bush and his foreign policy. I would think Tony Blair could use some of that influence to try to get the United States and Russia to take sensible steps, and perhaps that would alleviate some of the need for British upgrading. That's a matter for the British to decide, but it seems to me that other countries have a big stake in putting some friendly pressure on the United States and Russia to take a lead here, not only because we have dangers to ourselves, but because we're setting such a poor example in a world where we profess, at least, to have a top priority to avoid proliferation.
Sorry, can I just come back to this one point? I mean, I'm aware...
just hold on, you need your microphone.
I'm sorry.
And just keep it quick because we are
very quickly, but thinking of this morning's discussion on anti-poverty strategies, you know, I mean, the expenditure on this armaments is just huge, and yet we're continuing this Pandora's box. So in some ways, how can we set an example to Iran and others if we are not making serious moves to actually disarm on our nuclear deterrence?
Well, director of the IAEA, Al-Bardi, said it's awfully hard to convince someone to stop smoking if you're chain smoking yourself.
Absolutely.
Right. On that note, anybody on that side? No, I guess it's the center that dominates today. So right there.
Hi, I'm Kate Brandt from the Roosevelt Institution. I just wanted to follow up on the question about India. Why, in light of what you said about the lack of full inspection, do you think that Mohammed Al-Baradei of the IAEA came out so early in support of this program?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I have a great deal of respect for him, and I wouldn't try to speculate on why. I just don't know.
Okay. Right behind you, gentlemen. Yes.
Senator Skip Rhodes, what would be your guidance to the administration, especially in light of the India treaty now, with respect to North Korea and Iran?
North Korea and Iran, I think there are some similarities and there's some differences between the two. In the case of the North Koreans, while we've been looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, they've been building nuclear weapons in North Korea. So they're building weapons. They've got, according to our best intelligence estimates that have been public, I don't have any insight on it, that they already have a production line of nuclear weapons. So that situation has not been on the front burner, in my view, and it should have been on the front burner. I always thought it was a much more acute problem than Iraq, and certainly evidence has borne that out. The Iranian, but so on the North Korean situation, I haven't heard anybody say that we have a good nuclear option there. If we did have, I'd say not nuclear, if we had a good option to take out nuclear facilities, if we did have it at one time, it was still a very poor military option given the consequences. But since they have moved the material away from the reactor, with the number of caves they've got dug, probably in North Korea, I would think that our targeters would have a very hard time with military targeting. So I think North Korea has to be addressed primarily diplomatically. China has to be enlisted and is being enlisted. I think the administration is working hard with China. I think they ought to continue doing that. And I'll come back to one other point after discussing Iran. On the Iranian situation, they have had underway nuclear ambitions for a long, long time. I have raised in meetings with the Russian Ministry of Atomic Energy several times over the last few years the Russian supplying of the nuclear reactor in Iran and asked them why they were doing it. And as soon as you ask that question, they give you a 20-minute lecture on the Shah of Iran and how we and the Western countries helped the Shah when he had a nuclear program going, and why are we changing now? So I quit asking that question after about the third lecture. Took the whole meeting. The Iranian situation has to be a diplomatic approach as much as humanly possible. Certainly while we're in Iraq, our leverage vis-a-vis Iran is extremely weak in terms of military use, military power, because the Iranians have all sorts of Shiite allies in Iraq. So our position in Iraq has greatly weakened our hand against the Iranians. Now, the common denominator between the two is that for about 3 years, we did not talk to the North Koreans at all. Now we are talking to them. I can't understand, given the fact that the military option vis-a-vis Iran is a very poor option in terms of all the repercussions that would take place throughout the Muslim world. I mean, it could be really a tragedy. The Iranians possessing a nuclear weapon is a very poor option. When you've got two poor options, it seems to me that you would talk directly to the Iranians. I mean, it just seems to me you would do that at some point. And we are not seemingly willing to do that. We went through this stage with North Korea for about 3 years. We now are finally engaging with North Korea. I'm not saying that direct talks is going to solve the problem, but I do believe that we're going to have to engage with the Iranians at some point in time, and it seems to me the sooner the better.
All right, I'm afraid this is going to end the session. I'm sorry. I'm instructed that the time has come up. So please join me in thanking Senator Nunn. If you need further information on his thoughts, you can check nti.org, the website. But meanwhile, before you go, I'm supposed to make a couple of announcements. Please, just one more second. Tomorrow's breakfast will begin at 7:30 a.m., and it's here in the Grand Ballroom. And in your conference program materials, you will find some information about the various breakfast tables that will be hosted in order to promote discussion. And we hope that you will be able to be part of this conversation, partnership building across borders conversation. And then after the breakfast at 8:30 a.m., Jan Wells will have a conversation with Ted Turner, the chairman of the UN Foundation and co-chair of the Nuclear Threat Initiative. So with that said, thank you very much. Good night.